Hello and welcome back to One-on-One Shadowboxing. We are here in the studio and our guest is Jörg Imberger. Jörg, we discussed the issue of the problems of the Swan River, and we get into that stage when we realizing we got the technology for lots of things. But tell us, what's wrong with the use of 21st century technology and the effect for our environment and our kids?
Well, I'll just give you a little example. I bumped into an old friend, and he said to me he's retired from the university, he's doing a new venture. And I said, what are you doing? And he said he discovered the productivity of people, if they have their email on all the time, is about a tenth of the people who just switch it on once a day, because this multitasking doesn't really work. So, yeah, technology is great. For instance, for me, I do stuff. I source a paper with Google, I write to the author, and 10 minutes later I have a copy of the paper. But that's good. But we have to learn also to say no, like in anything in life, you know, too much is no good. And people are not being taught how to say no. And I guess the second reason why we're having problems in Western Australia is that if you look at the decision makers, big industry people, anybody really in Western Australia, they really haven't gone through the sort of transitions that a typical American or European or South American would go through in life, you know, hardships and so forth. And so, can you imagine making a decision, like if you take Tony Abbott, for instance, at the moment? I mean, I admire him in some instances. He really hasn't had any international experience, and then he gets tossed into with all these pretty savvy people over there, and he has to cope with it. So in Western,
that's a good challenge.
That's a good challenge, but I mean, I think that, you know, the learning on the job, when the environment's at stake. I give you another example. I mean, about a year ago, whatever it was, the cockatoos, the corellas were going on the greens in the golf course.
Yes.
And I don't know if you saw in the paper, but the EPA and the police decided the only humane thing was to shoot these things. The maturity of the decision-making process is pretty poor in Western Australia, I think in Australia generally.
So we even lost the common sense?
We've lost the common sense, but the challenges and the opportunities are there, Tibor. Let's take Western Australia as a whole. We have the highest per capita carbon emissions in the world. If you then add to those the carbon emissions which we export to make money on, like the coal and all this stuff, we're twice as high as anybody else in the world, just roughly.
So we are the highest.
The highest, yeah. On the other hand, we have energy resources, and so I should say 50% of those carbon emissions come from stationary sources, electricity generation and so forth. If you go up to the Kimberleys, and John Lewis, long time ago in '63, wrote a paper highlighting the resources, are enormous. They're about 10 times the total Australian energy needs you could generate up in the Kimberleys. Now, in the '60s, that was not possible because the transmission costs were enormous. But ABB and other companies now have developed technologies where, and there's the use of technology, you see. Very high voltage DC lines can now deliver Kimberley tidal power to Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide at the same cost roughly as coal. Just roughly, that's what they're saying.
So all over the country.
And we could ship it off to Singapore and Bali and all these other places as well. So we could negate all the carbon emissions using Kimberley power in Perth, right?
So that's for the start.
That's for a start. The second thing is then you plant those trees that we talked about to bring back the water and the health costs, reduce the health costs, and we could be carbon neutral. So not only can we advertise in 20 years' time we have the highest biodiversity in the world, we could also advertise we're the only place in the world that is carbon neutral.
And self-sufficient with drinking water.
Drinking water. And if you bring the trees back, also the farmers would get water. The desalination plants are okay for people, but they don't do the farmer much good.
No.
They don't do the nature and trees. And if you go to the southwest now, all the big trees are suffering from water stress and they're getting diseases. All that would be fixed. Now, what about some food? Well, first of all, the water will also regenerate the wheat belt. Then we have a lake up north, which is called Lake Argyle. It's 1,000 square kilometers. And it's a unique lake because it's deep in the middle and it's got these large shallows. And think about it, if you have water that deep and if you have water this deep, if you heat it on the surface the same way, this water will get much hotter than this water because there's less water.
Normal physics,
The water on the side will be warmer, will overflow. So this lake, and if it's cold, it's the reverse. So this lake constantly exchanges the boundary water with the middle water. So it's ideal for aquaculture. So we put right around the edge some aquaculture. That will provide all of West Australia's fish needs. We can generate about 20,000 tons of fish.
So it's not overfishing anymore.
No. And half the food you put into the fish goes into the lake, which raises the trophic level of the lake.
Yes.
It sequesters more carbon. Then Don Hansey had this great idea that we would then make Lake Argyle the exotic food place for the wealthy around the world. They could come and visit and go on a safari. You know, Charlie Sharper runs a hotel up there. People like that are all in favor of it. So you have Lake Argyle as the sort of the country's cultural center. You
yes.
have Perth, that is going to be the garden city of the world. And you have the resource industry, which pays for the short term. When that runs out, will be totally self-sufficient. And until the trees grow, why don't we just take some water out of the South Yarragadee? It's got 1,000 years worth of water down there.
Just in the reserves.
In the reserves.
Yes.
And you know, nobody in Western Australia has a problem having shares in the coal industry, the iron industry, or the diamond industry. They have a life of 50 to 100 years if you're lucky.
Yes.
So
but
why don't we
have a share in a real resource for 1,000 years?
That's right.
And where everyone in the world wants to drink water,
that's right.
And we got it.
Yeah. So if you went ahead with what I'm saying, that in 20 to 50 years' time, we would be the envy of the world. And of course, envy can be turned into money. So we'd have high-end tourism, low-end tourism, and so forth. The only problem is we'd have to watch it that we don't get even more immigrants. Because the place would be really to drink or eat. Because, you know, I mean, we have a moral responsibility in my eyes. Global warming is going to put 500 million people out of a home worldwide.
Instead of the 54 million which we got now.
That's right. 500 million people. We are the highest polluters per capita in the world, so I think we have a moral responsibility. So I would say let's change into the direction I'm suggesting. Let's get ready so we can take a sizable number of these unfortunate immigrants. Let's get rid of the American, German, and so forth tourists. Let's look at the boat people as being our responsibility. And let's do all this systematically so that no harm is not.
So with these great and practical ideas, which doesn't cost arms and legs, because investing in the trees is not a huge cost.
An industry here could do this.
And it provides jobs as well on a very economical basis.
That's right.
So, Jörg, what is needed for the West Australian governments to have an act bipartisan, including the Greens,
including the industry,
and the industry? So what is the moving engine? So do we need a bigger disaster, what we're facing with, or what is your view on that, Jörg?
Well, it's difficult to answer. If I go to London and talk to some very senior politicians of the upper house and lower house, the general consensus seems to be that half a dozen people I've talked to is that we need a major disaster before people will come. If you believe what these US biologists told me, that we're just parasites on Earth and killing the host, then you need a major disaster. I don't subscribe to either views. I really think that traditionally it used to be leaders, and that's the definition of a leader.
That is bloody hell the definition of leader, Jörg.
If you go back to Gough Whitlam, I mean, he was shot down in the end, but he provided some alternative. If you go back to Menzies, I used to, as a kid, go and listen to in the Kew Town Hall, and he was a joy to listen to, you know. But now, I think the media, I don't think you can blame the politicians all that only. The media makes it almost impossible for these people to function. I mean, look at Tony Abbott goes to this international forum, and what do they ask him about his travel expenses? What an embarrassment. And don't these people have any respect for the man? They could have waited until he got home to ask these questions, but they don't.
He was brave enough to face with that, but I understand what you're saying. The problem is
leadership.
Leadership.
First, you need a leader, and secondly, you need to give the leader half a chance to be a leader. And the other thing that people constantly forget, you know, a leader needs followers. Without a leader in Germany, if people hadn't followed Hitler, he wouldn't have been able to function. Mussolini, any of these people.
Very true. Right? But I still, Jörg, I still don't understand, how can we convince our politicians and the people of Western Australia, which is only 2 million, okay? And not 500,000 anymore, not 700,000.
Okay. Well, maybe I can turn around from my own experience.
Yes.
4 or 5 years ago, I was invited by the Royal Society to go to England. They put on a little workshop for the cabinet, the British cabinet, plus some very high public service people. The question was global warming. They invited 3 scientists, myself plus 2 others, to give a presentation in the morning.
Yep.
And in the afternoon, we had this two-way discussion. We learned what their constraints are and so forth. And at the end of the day, I had benefited, but they had benefited enormously from everybody. And they presumably would then make better laws. Well, I tried the same idea here, that we could get the West Australian cabinet down to the Centre for Water Research and invite some pro and cons on certain questions.
Yeah.
But, you know, everybody says they're too busy to commit a whole day.
Are they? If you're looking at the West Australian government and the parliament in here,
yeah, they
are got the less sitting days in the whole world in any parliament.
Yeah.
So why the heck their government not have enough time? Nothing is busier and nothing is more important than solve the problem with the energy, the food, and the water.
Yeah.
So if it needs a month of workshop 24/7, we're paying the wages for the politicians. We have to tell them, out of this bloody house, go somewhere, workshop the things, and come back with solutions for us.
Yeah, I know.
And if you know our priorities and not necessarily building a bloody stadium for sport for $1 billion on the swamp, then we can probably plant trees. How many trees we can have for $1 billion investment from the government?
You could fix the carbon problem.
We can fix the carbon problem. Instead of that, we want to fix the problem of people, 60,000 of them, sitting there for AFL matches.
Getting drunk.
And getting drunk, and not 45 sitting where they can sit now.
Yeah. I don't want to get back to this, but I do think we are parasites. We certainly behave like that. And you mentioned before we started this that you thought people were sort of a higher organism with, you know, who kind of could resist temptation. I haven't seen much evidence. It's a question, do you want to live in Margaret River in 6 or 7 hectares with wonderful biodiversity, or do you want to live in Hong Kong, Singapore, Germany, Cologne, or Berlin, or something like that?
In the concrete bunkers.
Right. I know where I want to live.
Me too.
Right. And
that's
we have
why
the
I'm
opportunity.
not going back to Europe. That's the only reason.
And we have the opportunity here, and I just wish that people would think...
Can realize and use it.
Yeah, that's right. And so when they buy a block of land which has some nice trees on it and so forth, in a small house, they go in and knock it over. They clear the whole property. They spray the whole property because the wife doesn't like creepy crawly things. Then they build a house which goes right to the edge, and then you ask them, why do you move here? Oh, it's a leafy area.
Not anymore, unfortunately. Jörg, thanks very much for your visit, and again wish you the best for your little fight for the future.
My crusade.
The crusade for the future. And don't forget, please, next week, same channel, same time, one-on-one shadow boxing.